Hi, I'm Tom. It is time for another lore and paint video, this time on one of the World Eater's unique Terminators, the Red Butchers. Unlike many other Legion Terminators, who are the elite of the elites, the Red Butchers are more like the 30k equivalent of Blood Angel's Death Company. There isn't much lore for these guys, as they are mostly a Forge World thing and not featured all that much in the main book series. But what lore there is, I will go through in this video. But first I'm going to give a bit of a backstory to why I am making them. If all you're here for is the lore, I have included timestamps for that, so go ahead and browse to that section. I first learned of the Red Butchers back in 2013 when I attended my second Games Day. This was in the golden age of Horus Heresy releases, and Games Workshop for that matter. You could go up to the Forge World artists and sculptors and ask them about things, or tell them how much you appreciated their work. Black Library authors too. The passion of the individuals that crafted this universe was on full display, and I do mean display. While the quality of the pictures and videos that I took is not the greatest by today's standards, the displays are still amazing, especially for the time when they were made. I believe this was prior to any plastic kits for the Heresy, so everything is resin. I noticed when looking back on these pictures that I snapped at the Forge World Sculptors booth that the entire squad of Red Butchers was actually unhelmeted on these original sculpts. I'm interested in finding out why that changed. Now it's only the unit leader called the Devoured that is left unhelmeted. My personal guess would be that they would feel less monopose if it was helmeted instead of unique faces being repeated over and over in a larger squad. Anyway, back to the Butchers. At the time, I actually wasn't all that fond of them. But then again, I had only just started collecting my 40k World Eaters at that time, and many of the Heresy aesthetics took a bit of getting used to for me. For instance, I really disliked the Contemptor back then. Now it's one of my favorite things ever, so a lot of things have changed. Mark III armor as well. I wasn't fond of that at all. Now it's my second favorite armor mark. So, things changed, fortunately. Enough nostalgia for the time being. Let's get back on track. If you've followed the channel, you may know that I am converting a Horus Heresy army from my old 40k collection. And this year I set myself the goal to go to an event with that army. And while I can field about 3,000 points of converted models, I don't want it to be exclusively 40k models that I have converted. And with unique Legion models available, I have to include some of them, right? I already had 5 of them, because I am a completionist and must have one of everything for the collection, within reason of course, especially Legion unique stuff. I feel like their rules are a bit lackluster, and while I have faced them once before, it was sort of a mutual destruction kind of thing. In any case, I decided to include them in the list I'm working towards, and I want a unit of 10 of them. The 5 that I had already painted up, but I painted them in white and blue livery. I've since sort of regretted this. Not that it doesn't look good, because I really think that it does, but their name is, after all, the Red Butchers. And I think I was going off of the original Forge World color scheme and trying to improve it when I made them blue. But I've since come across some updated official artwork where they're red, so I want to try and match that on this new iteration. So I took the 5 that I had already painted, and I painted over the blue panels with some white, and then some red contrast paint. Making sure to re-weather the parts that I painted over. I have also decided that some of my other veteran units, such as Rampagers, which I will likely do a video on at some point in the future, will also have red shoulders. In my head, this is to show that the units that are furthest down the path of Khorne has adopted this style, and to give hints to the future of the Legion in that way. As in, the more junior legionaries will try to ape this behavior and heraldry. This will also be a theme for the helmets when I get around to making my Rampager units. With the original 5 sorted, it was a matter of acquiring another 5, scrubbing them in soapy water, assembling them and priming them, and then painting them up. which I will be doing in the background while I weave in some of the lore that is available for them. So before we can get into the lore of the Red Butchers themselves, we briefly need to talk about the Butcher's Nails. I'm not going to go into detail about all aspects of it. That might be something for a future video where I do some lore with a different unit. But very briefly, the Butcher's Nails is an implant into the skull and brain of the Legionary. It is an aggression implant that causes pain and suffering whenever you're not performing violent actions. So to ease this pain, you need to perform violent acts. They are aggression implants. They are a crude copy of the ones that were installed into Angron. Angron got them because he was a slave and a gladiator, and it was to the amusement of the people watching these gladiatorial games on his homeworld of New Syria to make the gladiators fight even more fiercely and barbarically. The world eaters performed this surgery on themselves, while the apothecaries did as a way to emulate their Primarch and try to earn his respect, which he never really had for his legionaries. Anyway, the full details of that story might be for another video. That is sort of the backstory for it. So by the outbreak of the heresy, almost every legionary in the World Eaters had this surgery performed, with a few exceptions, such as librarians, as they became way unstable and basically exploded everything around them, no longer able to control their warp manifested powers. So a couple of librarians are left. Some that are interred into dreadnought chassis at this point in time are also exempt from it, or expeditions that was far away from the main legion force, such as the one led by Endred Har, who is a Black Shield character, but a World Eater. So like I said, by the time we get to the heresy, nearly everyone has this implant, especially new recruits as well. It's just standard part of Legion indoctrination and surgeries. By the time we get to Istvan III, this is where the story of the Red Butchers start. It is not uncommon for legionaries to be, as they say, lost to the nails, meaning that they've given in to the desires caused by the nails and no longer can distinguish friend from foe, slaughtering for the sake of slaughter. Up until the heresy, the standard procedure for this was simply to give them the Emperor's mercy, much like the Blood Angels do with their death company, basically ending the life of the legionary, and he will no longer be of any use for future battles, which is kind of a loss. And because of this waste, by the time of the heresy, the Legion had a different way of handling the ones that are lost to the nails. So by the time that we reach the outbreak of the heresy and Istvan III, from now on, when legionaries succumb to the nails, the standard procedure is for apothecaries to subdue the afflicted legionaries. The tech marines of the Legion would then make customized sets of Terminator suits from salvaged war gear, but this isn't just to armor the guy, it's actually to restrain him. The thing is, these suits of customized armors are actually remote controlled. Their activation is anyway, meaning that when not in combat, the tech marines can simply turn off the suits and they become a one-man holding cell, trapping the legionary inside the massive plates, completely immobile, except for the screaming, yelling, and curses of the legionary. Between battles, these suits are hung in chains in the holds of the warships of the Legion. Not a very pleasant way to go. I think I'd actually rather be a dreadnought that can be deactivated from time to time, put into a sort of a stasis mode. The first time the Butchers as a unit and concept saw action was on Istvan V, where they were unleashed in the general direction of the loyalist forces to just hack apart whatever they saw fit. Obviously, the Butchers take losses too, and unlike the Death Company again, they aren't put down at the end of the fight if they manage to survive it. They're simply deactivated and then hung on chains and awaiting the next war zone. And the guys that do get killed, what is left of their armor is salvaged and then coupled together with other suits of armor that the Tech Marines can salvage. And by this time, there's surely a few that have been lost to the nails elsewhere that can be put into those suits. So the Red Butchers are actually not an elite fighting force. They're the lost ones. Normally you see Terminator units as the elite of the Legion. For this particular formation, it's actually just the armor that's strong enough to confine them when unpowered, and I suppose to give them a better chance of reaching the enemy lines and thus causing more mayhem. In essence, they're a little bit of a precursor of what the 40k World Eaters would lean towards, being almost entirely lost to the nails. There's a little bit more tragic lore to these guys, but since I mentioned that they aren't an elite Terminator unit, there are actually elite Terminator units inside of the World Eaters. They're called the Devourers, and these guys are actually the bodyguards, or supposed bodyguards, of Angron. They were the Terminator elite at the time of finding Angron and during the heresy. I'm not going to go into too much detail about these guys because I might one day convert up my own unit and I'll have some lore to talk about at that time. But the short story is that Angron sort of despises these guys, and it isn't actually an honor to be a Devourer in the World Eaters Legion because you can't keep up with the Primarch, so you're not fighting by his side. And the only way to join the Devourers is to kill another Devourer and take his place. An honor a few characters have earned but opted not to take, such as Karn. He killed a Devourer but opted not to become one, because why would he? Like I said in the beginning, the lore on the Red Butchers is a little bit scarce, but we do have a couple of other sources that are quite interesting and actually tragic if they weren't already. I mean, they're really tragic being just hung there to scream, lost to madness. But it gets a little bit more tragic. Let's look at this case study of Legionary Sukal Dror. See, the thing is, when they started this practice, they couldn't tell if you were a loyalist or a traitor if you got lost to the nails. So a good deal of the original Red Butchers were actually loyalist World Eaters that were lost to the nails during the fighting on Istvan III. He was salvaged as one of the grievously wounded but not quite dead World Eaters, and he got interred into this makeshift armor, and he was unleashed during the Battle of Bod, specifically during the Battle of Tradishima. I believe it was the capital of Bod, which is a World Eater recruitment world of sorts. We can get into the World Eater supply lines, recruitment worlds, and associated forge worlds at a later date, because that is actually super interesting too. But that's not this video. During this battle, where the Iron Hands, commanded by Autek Mor with a detachment of Solar Auxilia and some Imperial Fists, attacked this world. This unfortunate loyalist Red Butcher managed to chop down at least a dozen loyalist Astartes and a lot more Solar Auxilia before his rampage was stopped when he was crushed by a Iron Hands Mastodon. Speaking about the armor, I'll try and take a few close-ups of some of the armors. You can see some of the awesome small details on the models is that there is this kind of padlock locking mechanism symbolizing that they are actually locked in there, which is a nice touch. Legionary Dror wasn't the only quote-unquote loyalist Red Butcher that was there. The Iron Hands had a very tough time dealing with them. They had to resort to some pretty unfortunate tactics themselves of rolling up Mastodons, as Legionary Dror was ended by. And they basically had to run them over to stop them from running rampant within their lines, or use the cyclonic melta cannons on the Mastodons to fire into the melee, ending both Red Butchers and the unfortunate Iron Hands engaged with them. That's Iron Hands cold logic for you, but I suppose it's better than being overrun by ravening madmen in Terminator suits that have a hard time knowing if they're mortally wounded. I suppose since there is limited lore, we can briefly go over the rules of the unit, at least the relevant ones as they pertain to the lore. So, of course, they're armed in Cataphractii Terminator armor, but I suppose in reality it's sort of a quote-unquote heresy Mark V kind of Terminator armor, just based on Cataphractii. I suppose that might be the easiest to work with or most readily available. But in a way, I could see this being used by other Terminator suits as well. Maybe it's just easier to confine the Legionary inside Cataphractii rather than Tartarus or Indomitus. Could be that's the reason. But yeah, come with a couple of special rules. They're fearless, they don't know what's going on, so that makes sense. They have hatred everything, which also makes sense. This basically means that they can reroll their attack dice, which is cool. Their stat line is a normal Terminator stat line, except for them having weapon skill 5. With the Sergeant, who is actually called the Devoured, having an extra attack. These guys only have leadership 6, but being fearless, they don't need it. Then they have a unique World Eaters rule that this unit has and any independent characters can be upgraded to. if it is an upgrade. It's called Ravening Madman, and what it does is twofold. The positive aspect of this rule is that any weapon that hits them in close combat counts their strength as 1 less when determining the wound roll. Sadly, this could be great, but it isn't, because there is the caveat that this does not alter the threshold for instant death. See, if that was a thing, this rule would be good, but sadly it does not. It just means that normal sort of strength weapons have a harder time wounding you. The drawback of the Ravening Madman rule is that no matter what your weapon skill is, you're counted as majority weapon skill 3 when the enemy hits you. So this is an interesting case where, say, a butcher unit goes up against a tactical squad. They actually end up hitting each other on 3s because the butchers can use their weapon skill 5 on the attack, but when the weapon skill 4 tacticals hit them back, they're hitting versus weapon skill 3. It is thematic, means that they're just throwing attacks with reckless aggression, not considering any parries or anything like that. They're simply just flailing at the enemy in a berserk manner, which is cool. I suppose there is another drawback to this rule, which is that only characters with the Ravening Madman can join a unit or the Primar. As for weapon options, they come with a power axe and a combi bolter, but the models are supplied with 2 power axes, which you can exchange the combi bolter for free, which of course you do because this is not a shooty unit and it's an extra attack. But all of these attacks are at initiative 1 on a unit that can't run, which is why I'm building a transport later in this video, and hopefully I will make it thematic if you stick around for that part. They can actually be upgraded to have lightning claws, but the official kits, the arms are already on the shoulder pads, which means that it's a bit hard to put lightning claws on them, except if I put regular cataphractii arms and shoulder pads on there, which I definitely can. And had I had more time, I probably would have magnetized more than the 2 sergeants in the collection of 10 of them. But it's super glue. Suppose I could snap them off at a later date, or kit bash some new ones. Lightning claws would actually be great. For one, you hit at an initiative. You already have hatred everything, so you reroll to hit. With lightning claws, you reroll to wound. It's a pretty good deal. The sergeant can exchange any of his axes or combi weapons for power fists, chain fists, or thunder hammers, or magna or minor combi bolters. But in a way, the optimal loadout for him would actually be something like a chain fist and a thunder hammer. Then he can deal with pretty much anything. I've magnetized mine, so I can either keep them cheap or put some herdy weapons on there. So for the list that I'm building for the event I'm going with the dual chain fist as the kit is supplied with as an option. He can also take a grenade harness, but since almost everything is initiative 1, except if I do the lightning claw thing, then that's just wasted points. I think I will be running the unit mostly as a 10-man unit, and thus I won't need 2 sets of twin chain fists. So what I'll be doing with this second set of chain fist arms is that I think that will be great for a seamless conversion of putting some cataphractii lightning claws on there, which I have plenty spare of. Sadly, I won't get to it in this video, but I will at least have 1 lightning claw armed Red Butcher at some point in the future. Maybe that will be a catalyst for me arming more of them with lightning claws. But at least he'll have these unique shoulder pads, which is actually a unique part of the Terminator armor. It is a Sauron pattern cataphractii shoulder pad. So it's actually not a salvaged part, it is a uniquely fabricated piece of Terminator armor from the Forge World Sauron, which is World Eater aligned. And like I mentioned earlier, I might do a video on the whole World Eater's organization, logistics, that sort of stuff in a video that's appropriate for that topic. I think that's enough lore. Let's get on with the project that I'm working on. And if you're here for the lore and don't want to stick around to see how I tie the transport into this lore, then thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in another video. If you want to see that stuff, then stick around and I'll thank you again at the end. Cheers. Since the unit is in a variant of cataphractii armor, apparently a Sauron pattern of cataphractii armor, and this armor does not allow the wearer to run, I decided that they needed a ride. But not just for the ride, since these are ravening madmen with only slaughter on their tormented minds. I figured that they would be a risk to their own legion as much as any enemies. The whole reason that they're kept in a prison of deactivated armor on their ships. So to extend that logic, I figured that they would be in a special transport, where a tech marine would have them pinned in place in deactivated armor, and as the transport made its way towards the enemy, The Tech Marine would open the doors, activate the armors, and they would find their way out of the hull of the transport, thus delivering this ball of death and madness in the midst of the enemy's ranks to sow chaos and disruption, while the rest of the army catches a bit of a reprieve as the enemy has to deal with this unit. It will be the only true vehicle in the list that I'm working towards, but fear not, more vehicles are coming to this army. The Spartan was part of a big second-hand lot that I picked up from a friend who wanted to focus entirely on his Mechanicum force instead. Technically, no modifications are needed as this is a Heresy era vehicle, but since I have established a theme both narratively and visually with the rest of the force, I felt like I needed to tie in the vehicle to the force and also to hint at the future of the Legion. So I added some trophy racks and some chains here and there, which does give it a bit of that 40k vehicle vibe. I also added these half-circle spike thingies to act as both trophy racks and also as spikes that can impale anyone unfortunate enough to stand its ground before this ceramite and adamantine behemoth. Not that you wouldn't be crushed by the tracks anyway, but you know, it looks intimidating. This Spartan also marks the first time that I have done transfers in at least 20 years. I've normally disliked the look of them, but new products such as the Microsol and Microset and techniques such as weathering on top of them and tying them into the rest of the paint job has made me change my mind on transfers. This will be the first of many, and like I often do, this will happen to a large portion of my other armies. Just because you're done with a model doesn't mean you can't go back and bring it up to another level. Once you either unlock the skills or have the time to do so. Time for some weathering. And of course a bit of blood splatter. All in all, I had a great time painting up these guys. And the vehicle too. It was a lot of fun. I hope you have found the video interesting or entertaining. And I will leave you with some shots of the final models and unit. I really look forward to putting these guys on the table. The role that they're going to serve in my particular force is going to be that of you have to deal with this. Either you shoot at the Spartan and its occupants, or the rest of the army will reach you. If they do manage to pop it, hopefully I get far enough along that I can either catch something or be a blocking force that you don't want to go near. In any case, I think it's very thematic and I look forward to seeing it in action. As a bit of a teaser for future videos in this series, here is a bit of a group shot of a bunch of different lots I've picked up of secondhand stuff, both the vehicles and whatnots from a friend that is Heresy appropriate, and then a couple of lots of secondhand Berserkers for 40k. I will need them in the near future to make up a bunch of new despoilers so that I can have as many chain axes as possible. One of the lots even came with a bunch of old Forge World chain axes that are sadly now out of print. With all of these guys, I should be able to equip the entire force that I'm bringing to the event that I'm working towards with chain axes. And maybe even go back and retrofit a couple of the guys that are already built with chain axes as well. Enough about that in this video. There will probably be a video on this topic within the next month or so, unless I feel like the idea isn't good enough, then I'll do something else, of course. But for now, if you made it all the way here, I want to thank you for watching and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers.